the place got flipped, and I think it was being held by a company. I'm not sure it was an individual. I think it was held by a company. And they didn't really care to bother whoever did the work to close the permits. So that's what ended up pushing back our closing. And we had to keep extending our rates because they weren't closing these permits.
That situation was one of the tougher permit related situations, right?
It was odd because what it came down to is we just had to make a decision. And in that situation, when you can't wait because of rates changing and because of extensions and deadlines, the most helpful thing was just being informed on the worst case scenario. And Larry's girlfriend helped us out because she's a general contractor or has her license. And she kind of walked us through the problems that could arise from that permit being open. And essentially the problem was I owned it once I bought it. I owned that open permit, and I'm going to get fined by the city until I closed it.
Oh, wow.
So like Larry was saying, what we had to do was put in the verbiage of the contract that the seller is required to close this permit, not in any time frame, but they had to close the permit. And that protected me. Or I think there was a time frame on it. With the money. But
So typically how we do these things, and this one was annoying because of the complexity around their issues. This flipper or whomever he was or
and
she
they were
was.
scared. You know, they didn't want to hold money in escrow and that was scarier because them saying, no, we won't put $20,000 in escrow. We estimated that maybe worst case scenario, this is a $20,000 problem for me. So we said, okay, put $20,000 in escrow. If you're confident about it, that shouldn't be a problem. And they said no. So we were like, so this might be a problem.
Wow. Yeah, that's a signal right there. It's like, why not put it in if you're certain it's going to get done, right? And they didn't want to do that. And again, it goes back to a lot of the market conditions at the time. Sellers could really bully buyers around, right? Yeah. So the first step in this is make sure the contract offer that you make includes seller must close out any open or expired permits, right? So that's number one. And so that was in your contract. So when title company found the issue, it identified, hey, open permits, they called us and they identified that, hey, these permits aren't closed, they need to be closed, and there's a little bit of complexity around this. What do you guys want to do? Because we had the option at that point. Like you could cancel the contract and get your deposit back if you wanted to at that moment. Whereas if you didn't have that language in the contract, you're closing this thing and you're owning it. And we would have had no leverage whatsoever, right? So then we started to dig, right? You were digging yourself. You were calling the city. You were, again, great buyers, like just locked in, ready to do the deal, both you guys. And so you were calling, you were trying to figure it out. We were calling, trying to figure it out. We were trying to talk to the general contractor who first did the deal. And we learned, I think, during this process that they switched contractors. You remember that?
Yeah, they switched contractors and switched engineers.
Yeah, it was a mess. They had a messy situation. So, and that's another reason why we were super concerned. So just like clearly, if they couldn't get it done with the first guy, like there's issues, right? So we found all that out. We had very vague responses from the seller because they just weren't super transparent. They didn't like to answer the phone, all that stuff. So again, just annoying experience. And then we decided we needed to tag in an attorney, right? So we had a call with one of our attorneys, and we'll talk about that here in a second. And then we also tagged in Dana, who's a general contractor, my girlfriend, and we kind of, as a team, evaluated your risk profile for what the next step would be, right? And again, just like drill this home. If you're working with an agent who doesn't have this exposure or this experience or this team, what are you going to do in that situation? Like if you had anybody else, somebody who just got their license or somebody that doesn't do 100-something deals a year, they would have been like, you got to pay for an attorney or you got to hire another contractor to help you answer these questions.
Right.
You would have spent $1,000 just trying to figure that out.
And then I would have spent all the money on all the work that they had to do after I bought the place.
Right. Yeah. So having the team ready to go again to handle any situation was, I think, super helpful because we just started picking up the phone. All right. Yeah. So here, back to the title company in Broward County, buyer chooses title, right? Palm Beach County, seller typically chooses title. This is typical. I mean, everything's negotiable, right? But it's customary. So you guys chose the title company. You were working with, both of you, with the title company that I work with a lot. And because that title company is owned by an attorney who we have a really good relationship with and is our title company, call it, right? We have a good rapport with the girls. They quickly called us up and said, hey, here's the issues with the permit. And I've been through this so many times with them that we quickly identified, what the risks were, what's going on from a title perspective. And then we said, okay, well, let's talk to the attorney and get his feel on like what we should do here, right? We already kind of knew, but it's always good to have that like third party guidance, right? So we jumped on a quick call, contract attorney, just to talk it over. Like, hey, what do you think? What do you think's going on? What do you think we should do here? They're being, difficult, right? And so we proposed a $20,000 credit. Or not a credit. We proposed a $20,000 escrow holdback, right? So basically what we typically do in these situations is we give the seller 90 days to solve this problem, or longer, whatever seems reasonable. We gave them 90, I think, or maybe even 6 months, I can't remember. And we proposed $20,000 in escrow. He solves the problem after we close, and he gets his $20K from the title company. The title company holds that money in escrow. If they don't achieve that goal, then we get the $20K. You, the buyer, gets the $20K. And so that is a good structure if you want to close. And you wanted to close because, one, you had your rent was expiring, right, on the current place you were living, and you wanted to lock in the rate because we were at a situation where we found out, we identified the permit issue, we gave them 2 weeks. We extended 2 weeks, I think, or something like that. And they were willing, we got them, this was hard. They were willing to give us, I don't know, $1,900 or something to basically extend your rate lock, right? Because we needed to extend the rate lock because the rates were moving at that moment.
That's great.
And so we knocked that out. So they gave us a $1,900 credit. You paid for her rate lock extension for $1,900. And then we got to the end of the 2 weeks and they still had done like nothing.
Not a single thing. Not a thing.
And then we were like, okay, we want to close now because we kind of have to, because you were in a jam and you were traveling around the world, not the world, you were traveling around the United States working at the time. And so you needed to kind of secure like a time to move everything in to get out of your other apartment. And so, we tried to get them to just close with that $20,000 escrow. And they were just like, nah, right? Yeah. And so then we called my GC Dana and talked it through with her. And we said, okay, here's the risk, here's the concern, here's what it looks like, here's the process, right? Because we didn't entirely, like, you didn't know the process of what if they do leave me high and dry, right?
Right.
And so she walked you through like, hey, well, you're not going to use them obviously to do the work. You're going to get your own GC. You're going to pull new permits or transfer these permits. So they need to release these permits to you, the new owner, and to the new GC, and kind of work through this whole process. So we talked through all of that, right?
Everything.
And we identified, okay, here's the risk profile now. What do you want to do, Connor? Right?
Yeah.
And
meanwhile, I'm trying to sleep.
Right? Right?
He was calling me every day at like noon. I was in the middle of sleeping.
Oh, it sucks.
I'd just wake up and I'd just be up all night.
It sounds like such a headache, right? Because
there's
a lot of contingency involved.
A lot of contingency, yeah. And I mean, it just, like you said, it just came down to how bad did I want the house and what was my risk tolerance like. And to me, that deal, after having sat on it we were probably dealing with it for a month at that point. It was a good deal. And we had talked about Airbnb and, I had all these options with that property. And worst case scenario, I have to shell out 10, 15, 20 grand. I'll make that money back eventually,
Yeah.
To me, the deal was more important.
Yep. So you made the decision, but we were able to get them to give a $5,000 escrow holdback.
Which Dana kind of laughed at, I think, when we talked about it. Well, if something happens, that's not going to help. But
that ain't going to cover it.
But it was something, and it was cool as a first time buyer to go through that process and even get the $5,000. I was pumped about that, even though it didn't mean anything. It was like you were saying, the sellers are bullying people, but that was like our little win.
Felt like a little win, right?
Yeah, we got that at the end.
We did the best we could, right? We worked it as best we could. We got the best number we could get out of that situation. And I think the biggest worry for me in that moment was like, usually you have open permits and you can identify very quickly, oh, this is simple. Like, we just got to do some clerical work and close it out, right? This was a little different. This could have been, we need to dig up some of the plumbing that they did wrong because the city didn't approve it or something, or the drawings need to be redrawn. And so now you need an architect and you pay him X.
Wow.
So like that was the concern. We didn't know because we weren't getting clear communication from the seller and or the GC and the previous GC.
The GC didn't even exist anymore.
Yeah.
They had a phone number they had a Google Voice number that didn't even work.
So just shady stuff.
Yeah, it was shady. And
So
then we dealt with it for another 6 months, honestly. I mean,
yeah. So how did that go?
that was awful. It was a nightmare, but to no cost to me, besides frustrations. And I was on the road a lot, and I had an Airbnb running, and now I've got the seller is contractually obligated to deal with this, so they're scheduling appointments at my home that I own and not telling me. So I've got contractors and inspectors and engineers showing up at my house, digging up my backyard when I have guests in my Airbnb. So, I mean, that was the biggest headache of it, just not being able to be in contact with anybody. I think I had to get Gary to reach out to them. I didn't send Gary a mean text, but I sent a mean text that I was like, I need you to tell the seller this. They can't have people showing up at my house anymore.
I remember. Yeah.
And the whole situation was just shady, and the contractors that were showing up every day were still shady. And that's not safe for anybody. That's not safe for them, or me or my guests. But ultimately, the city was my best friend in that situation. What really helped me was reaching out to the structural department at the city and getting their, not just what was going on in the moment, but what they had dealt with for the past 2 years with these contractors. They basically told me that these contractors were flaky, and they weren't doing everything up to code. They weren't doing what the city was asking, and then they would just blow the city off. So then I realized that the city's not failing to uphold their end of this deal. They're just dealing with a bad contractor. And then I had holes in the side of my house. You could see 10 feet under my house in the backyard.
Wow.
Yeah, and the city inspector would keep coming out, and he would get all upset, and he'd be like, this is the third time I've been out here in a month, and what I'm asking them to do is not done. And I mean, it just came down to getting very specific instructions from the city on what they needed, and then I had to go to the seller, who then had to go to the contractors that were showing up and really make them get this job done. And the problem there was that me not paying for it, they're using the cheapest labor possible.
Yeah.
So it got done cheap, but ultimately it got done. So
Such a headache.
that was a tough deal, but
this is all like a great story so people can really understand the consequences / the risks involved. And I'd say that worked out probably the best. I don't want to say the best it could have, but like pretty well.
for me, yeah.
Yeah.
Besides the headache of people management, I mean, it worked out better than we had imagined when I was talking on the phone in the middle of the night with you guys, trying to figure out if I wanted to buy the house or not.
Yeah, exactly. And we could have easily kind of been like, hey, it's $5K, $5K escrow, you'll be fine, right? But that's not the communication we gave you. We're like, hey man, like this
Worst
could be
case
20K.
scenario. Yeah,
I don't know.
You might be in the hole.
Yeah. Yep. And then the attorney was, I think, pretty real with you too, just like giving clear communication on, this is where this could go from this perspective, right?
Yeah.
And then also just understanding how to draw up an escrow holdback agreement. And because the title company does it so often, and I've actually done it so much with them on some of my personal deals, that like you got to make sure that's all tight too. So that was in the background that you didn't even probably get exposure to, but we had a full escrow agreement drawn up by the title company in order to hold that $5K back. So it was airtight.